We'll begin with session 1 right now. Humanity is reshaping the natural world, and our current use of resources is now at a breathtaking scale. The Global Footprint Network estimates that we consume resources that would require 1.7 planets to produce sustainability. We shall hear from the experts in this very first session, named Forging Sustainable Development, Impacting the Future. And I'd like to invite the following panel speakers and also the moderator to take their seats on stage. First, let's welcome Mr. Hazmi Yusof, the Managing Director, Frost & Sullivan, Malaysia. Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector, International Islamic University, Malaysia. Christy Owen, Chief of Party, USAID, Green Invest Asia, Thailand. Faroz Nadar, Executive Director, United Nations Global Compact, Malaysia. And to us Malaysians, you might be familiar with this personality, Mr. Kamarul Bahrin Harun, the Vice President, Deputy Editor-in-Chief, BM News and Current Affairs, Astro Awani. Let's welcome all of the role players. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to hand over the session now to Mr. Kamarul Bahrin, the moderator of the session. Mr. Kamarul, please.
Test 1, 2. Thank you so much, Ben. Assalamualaikum. Good morning. Apa khabar? This is supposed to be the land below the wind. Your voice travels everywhere. Can I hear it? That's Sabahan, right? No, my friend who runs a radio said, kita juga bah ini. So, this discussion today is going to be like that, right? You're going to participate, right? You have like 1 million questions, right? Okay, thank you so much. With that, that's how I want to introduce this panel, because we're talking about forging sustainable development, impacting the future. But the future starts now. The only reason I accepted to be here today, don't tell anyone else, I'm work in the media, I know I'm supposed to be neutral. But I actually love Sabah right after my own home state. Because in my entire career, that's nearly 3 decades, I nearly died doing an assignment here in Sabah. That's how much I love Sabah. But now you've got to love it like I do, or more. Because if we don't pay attention to this discussion, then the future doesn't look good, not only for Sabah, but for Borneo and for Malaysia. 4 people are going to tell you how you can start doing that today. I don't care whether you work with the Economic Development Corporation, or with the foundation, or with any other institution. Every one of you has a crucial role to play. And you have to trust me, because Astro Awani is the most trusted news channel in Malaysia, right? Right? Okay. Not said by you only, but as acknowledged by the Reuters Institute of Journalism by Oxford University Digital Survey, so I must back my things with facts. The reason I want to say that is because there's a lot of fake news. And Sabah's footprint on the digital world is a bit small compared to some other countries and some other states. But you have to trust me because, one, I love Sabah. The second reason I agreed to be here today is because this is the World Islamic Economic Forum. I wanted them to do this in Perlis, my own hometown. But no, they love Sabah so much. So I have to come here. And this completes my cycle this year, because in January, I was at the World Economic Forum. It doesn't have the word Islamic. So I've covered the secular, and now I'm covering the Islamic. So that's called balance and sustainability. So these four is going to prove to you that they are very diverse, so don't panic. I will link all their points together right after the fourth has finished the presentation. How does it work for you? First 45 minutes is going to be about their presentation. Second 45 minutes is all about you. How do we take what they say to work here in Sabah and in Borneo? So with that, I would like to introduce furthest away from me. And he came up to me last night during dinner. He said, Kamaro, I want to be the first. So I'm giving you the right to be the first because he said he has the most important points. I'm paraphrasing. Hazmi, Yusof, welcome to the panel. Managing Director, Frost and Sullivan, Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And then, how could it be sustainable if there are only thorns on the stage, right? Even in the audience, there are so many roses. So thank you so much. Christy Owen, Chief of Party USAID Green Invest Asia. This is Christine's first visit to KK. Can you believe it? Then give her a second round of applause. Then she come again. And of course, I am only half of what this next panelist is because I went to the non-Islamic science university called USM Penang, where he was the VC for the longest time. But he has gone further and now be more Islamic than I am because he's the rector of IIUM, International Islamic University of Malaysia. Not only that, when he was championing USM, for the first time the Malaysian government awarded the Apex status. And the Apex status was won by USM because of their sustainability plan. So I'm going to delve into that also. And last, of course, but not least, this is a guy. WIEF is so meticulous. They sent me an email weeks ago to ask me to talk to all my panelists. Babe, the last 2 weeks, haven't you been around KL? It's all about politics. And they want me to talk about sustainability in emails, right? I was trying to tell you who your next PM is and everything, but no, it isn't. So, but he then came to me on the flight and said, wow, the points you sent are very difficult. I said, no, this is Sabah, so we must answer the most difficult of questions because you have the best Malaysians here, right? You guys are so good that the superhero called Flash only visited Sabah, not other states in Malaysia, right? So you must be amazing. So that's it. I want to go straight to the point here. We have little time. So Mr. Hazmi, please take it away. Only 4 slides and over to you.
Okay, excuse me, I think I have a bit more than that. I have 9, but I'll make sure that I
your
stay
slide can be
10.
9, but your time is the same. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Very good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and I concur with Kamaro. This is such a beautiful place with beautiful people. So it's one of my favorite places in Malaysia, I must say. So thank you. So let me just get to it. Thank you very much. So I've been given 10 minutes to talk about the present and the future. So it's going to be a rapid fire session on my part. So I want to cover 4 things, what I call the 4 dimensions. First is more on the governance side. Second, technology. Third, business. And fourth, citizens, i.e. you and I. So let me start first, what's happening present and in the next 10 years. The big word right now is circular economy. So every government around the globe is really rushing to put into a framework of policy to make circular economy as the main policy in terms of moving the industry, the environment forward. So what does circular economy mean? I think let's keep it simple. This is the first session of the day, so I would like to use the Wikipedia's definition. So it's basically using the 3R. Basically, you whatever we produce, we reuse it. Whatever we produce, we repurpose it. And whatever we produce, we recycle it. So if you take 3 into account, this circular economy framework or mindset has been around in some countries, particularly in Japan. So if you look at Japan, if you go to a supermarket, it's very rare that you find somebody goes out there and buy imported beef, imported strawberries from some other place, imported Norwegian salmon. People focus on buying produce that is locally made, locally produced. They eat, they consume things which is in season. And secondly, whatever if they have a plastic bottle, they make sure that they actually reuse it. And a lot of the materials that you have in the supermarket are actually repurposed, like shopping bags and so on. So this is the basic tenet of circular economy, and I think if you look at the impact that it will have across the board, it will have a major impact in terms of sustainability. So that's the first start. Second, I would like to talk about smart technology. So a lot of people think smart technology as this very advanced, high-tech, aerospace-like technology, but no, it's not. Smart technology is basically technology that's really focused on maximizing, I think the key word here is maximizing capacity, maximizing efficiency. Simplest example is all of you probably have a car sitting out there. Average usage of a car of its lifespan is only 17%. That's on the high side. Typically, it's probably about 8% of its life is being used. The rest of the time, 92% of the time, is sitting idle in the car park, right? So that's a capacity that is not being maximized, for example. So when we look at smart technologies moving forward today and moving forward to the next 10 years, it's really going to be focused on driving capacity, maximizing capacity and maximizing efficiency. Good example of efficiency is if you look at the capacity of accommodation, for example. There's a lot of accommodation out there, houses, factories, and so on, that is not being fully utilized. So today you see that the likes of Airbnb it's prevalent in most places. Second is also office spaces. So with this co-working space, people are also maximizing commercial spaces. I'd like to take, one of the things that's not coming out here is one of the slides in the middle, but what I want to show you here is that this kind of technologies today, it's a technology that is adopted, that is being used by everyday people. So the big part of it is your handphone. Your handphone is one of the most common, one of the most powerful technology that's being used today, and it enables a lot of things moving forward. And all the other technologies that you see here is going to be driving what we feel that sustainability and inclusivity. So the next point I want to make, the third point I want to make is what we call as new business model. And this is having a big impact, I feel, again, on the theme of maximizing capacity, maximizing efficiency. So if you look at, for example, sharing economy, the gig economy, if you look at farmers moving forward, you see that one of the biggest problem of farmers is the fact that, when they look at a plot of land, they are unable to maximize their crops based on what is the best crop that they can plant, and how do they actually sell these crops, being typically a small farmer, especially this part of the world in Asia. So if you understand the crowdsourcing, so crowdsourcing, and it's being slowly practiced in places like Japan, a farmer that has only 1 acre of land can crowdsource together, and together, let's say 1,000 farmers are able to sell to retailers, to distributors much better than if they can sell on their own. So you can see that in terms of crowdsourcing, crowd purchasing, crowd selling, it will enable farmers to enhance their profitability. Second, you can see that more and more countries today are looking at providing a Grab-like model for their equipment, like tractors and all that. Why should one farmer buy, let's say, a tractor, and 70% of the time the tractor is lying idle in its farm? So the crowd ownership, for example, is another way of how we look at this thing moving forward. I think the other key thing that we see as a big driver in terms of closing the gap in terms of the poverty gap and all that is also the gig economy. So you see in my latest slide, okay, I don't have much time, that this opens up a more level playing field for people with less access to opportunity. And the final piece I want to make is what we call as quantified self, or basically personal data. And I think we talk a lot about big data, but what we're going to see coming very, very strong in the future is what we call as small data. Some of it term is small data, some of it term as quantified self, which means that we are using our own personal data to make our own analysis. So if you look at today, you have big data moving around. So we use big data every day. For example, to get from point A to point B, you are actually using big data to get to point A to point B in the most efficient way, in the most where you don't even get lost. There's an app that guides you from A to B. So that's on a big data tangent. So small data is about the data specifically tagged to you. And that's what the term called personal intelligence. So when you have that data, and data is the one that really makes AI work, right? So you take all this data, big data, your personal data, and you feed it to a AI platform, and couple that with machine learning, you will have personal analytics. So today we see that more and more government are racing towards this across the world. I understand even in the Philippines, there are a big push in terms of establishing digital identity, because with digital identity, you're able to authenticate, you're able to secure this personal data that you have. So meaning that whatever data that you have, that you generate, it is yours through biometric authentication. So today, one of the big themes from Microsoft, for example, to say that you can forget about password from now on. Everything will be moving towards a biometrics, whether it's facial recognition, whether it's the biometric thumb or fingerprint. It will be moving towards that authentication. So when you tag that with a more legal framework, which is the digital identity, many countries are rushing towards. Give you an example, Singapore is also trying to be the first to roll out digital identity. You find that together this will create a very ubiquitous way of generating data without you having to key it into a system. So whatever you do, your movement, what you eat, your finances, your health, it's all going to be uploaded through to a cloud, and from that on, with a basic AI engine, you're able to generate your own personal analytics. And with that, I think it will create a level playing field for people. Meaning, in the past or up to the present, in data or intelligence is more private to the how do I say, to the privilege, right? With this personal analytics being pervasive to everyone, I think it will create a big level playing field where anyone has the opportunity to access a market, to access let's say an opportunity. So I think those are the four things that we see happen. It's going to happen very quickly in the next 10 years. This is not something very much high in the 10,000 feet above the cloud. This is going to happen in a very short time. We are seeing the building blocks being made by countries across the world. And I think with that, we are able to collectively manage in terms of our carbon footprint. We are able to manage in terms of how we consume, how do we manage our resources. So with that, thank you.
Thank you so much. So that's the data guy who actually studied graphics and masters data. But you know, you only have one rose, and over to the rose right now. Christy, over to you.
Great. Good morning. Again, my name is Christy Owen. I am the Chief of Party for USAID Green Invest Asia. I'm based in Bangkok, and actually I've been living in Bangkok for the past 10 years, working on sustainable development programs across the region. So as I was sort of outed this morning, this is my first time to Sabah, but in my defense, I would say I was waiting for the right opportunity. So I am very happy to be here amongst you all and to share a few thoughts with you, and certainly look forward to discussing any of them further. But if there's maybe three things that you take away from my following few remarks, it would be what's on this title slide in relation to sustainable development. Partner, co-invest, and transform. And it is through these three things that I think reaching sustainable development goals, reaching sustainability metrics is possible. I'd like to start just with a quick summary of what is USA Green Invest Asia. We are a technical assistance facility that was established by the US government in 2017. We are primarily set up for the purpose of catalyzing investment for a low emissions future, specifically in the agriculture and forestry sector. We work primarily, actually I would say solely, with companies, multinationals and small, medium enterprises, as well as financial institutions, commercial banks, funds, investors, in order to increase the amount of investment into sustainable land use in agricultural and forestry businesses. And I was actually, when I was asked to join today, I said, I want to be like, are there going to be companies here, investors here, who are interested, who are involved in agricultural and forestry? And I can say, just even from looking outside in the exhibition hall, that this is true. I saw many booths that have as their products rely on natural capital, rely on natural resources for their business models. So over the next few years, we are working to increase private investment into sustainable businesses by $400 million. We do not have $400 million. Please do not ask me for $400 million. But what we want to do is partner in order to leverage $400 million into sustainable business opportunities, so that by 2030, our metric is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 25 million metric tons. So the theory is if you do more sustainable land use management, more sustainable agriculture, more sustainable forestry, you will reduce, avoid, and sequester greenhouse gas emissions. So that in the long term, companies are more sustainable, there is more investment in sustainable businesses, and that there is an increased reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which impacts us all. And we are doing this from a very regional perspective. Why are we doing it from a regional perspective? Because, quite simply, supply chains and finance flow across borders. The commodities that are produced here are bought by an off-taker through Singapore, which is then sold on to companies in the US or Europe. And so there is an integration of commodities, services, and finance that cannot be solely addressed by looking at one country alone. Thus, we look at countries in Cambodia, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. So why are we going through this effort, right? Why now? Barry Parkins, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Mars, big company Mars, said quite simply, it is no longer acceptable not to know where your materials are from. Right? In the age of sustainable sourcing, the SDGs, sustainability commitments, companies need to understand where their commodities are coming within their supply chain. Because quite simply, there are some enormous challenges facing the agricultural and forestry sectors. Age of the population is growing. There are more people that are going to be need fed. But at the same time, there are agricultural and food production practices which are driving forest loss and land degradation across Asia. It is estimated that about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions come from land use change alone in Asia. And you couple this with the fact that by 2030, 46% of the population in Asia will be millennials or Generation Z. These are young consumers who are very aware of the importance of the environment, the importance of social responsibility. They want organic, they want sustainable, they want to know the impact that their purchases have on their environment and their future. And then there's the pressure, the fact that companies are going to have to do more with less, right? They're going to have to use the land better. Just to put something in perspective, and because we look at regional, in 15 years, from 2000 to 2015, in Thailand and Cambodia, they lost a combined hectares of forest of 7.2 million hectares. That is the size of one Sabah, right? I'm not even counting the forest loss in Indonesia. So there is a pressure to do more with less, because what happens with your neighbors does affect you. I think we're seeing that now very globally and very concretely with the current health response. And there is awareness among companies. This percentage seems low on the one hand. 26% of companies that was recently surveyed by PricewaterhouseCoopers and Rabobank in a great study called the Asia Food Challenge, which I recommend, believe that their biggest challenge for the future is, in the next decade, is to address climate change and degradation. How are their business models resilient? How are they adapting? What kinds of technologies are they putting in place? How are they working with their suppliers? This goes above and beyond their concerns around labor, around farmer education, around infrastructure, and around government policy. But of course, to meet all these challenges, one thing is definitely needed, and that is investment. This is the second side of the coin, right? And it is a huge investment that is required by all estimates. As of 2017, only 25% of green finance in ASEAN came from private finance, and that was mostly through commercial banks. The rest of that finance was being done through donors and through governments. That's a big gap. 3% of green bonds, which was often touted as the solution for meeting the greening of the economy, well, only 3% of green bonds as of 2017 were going towards sustainable land use, agriculture, and forestry. That's not enough to help them meet the challenges that they require to change their business practices. And that current estimates total about $550 billion is required on top of what is already being invested by 2030 in order to meet the investment requirements of companies to change their business practices, to meet those challenges, to maintain the security of their supply chain, and to maintain the economy, right? This is double, more than double of what is being spent currently. Where does this all come from? How does this happen? So my last slide is a couple of ideas and a couple of things to keep in mind, because business as usual is not good business, right? So first, we talk about partnerships, SDG 17, for those of you who are familiar with your SDGs. SDG 17, partnerships to tackle complex challenges in supply chains and finance, right? To work through things like the importance of scale. The smallholder farmers was mentioned that there's, in Asia in particular, a lot of farms are small level, technology, blended finance, moving beyond CSR into models around shared value. Actually, what investments can be made to improve business functioning and business returns on investment. Second, leverage all sources for investment that are needed. Debt, equity, technical assistance, programs like USAID Green Invest Asia, right? Third, embrace environmental and social governance, principles and metrics, ESG. A lot of banks are talking about it these days, a lot of companies are talking about these days. How do you improve your environmental and social governance to reduce your risk and to be able to monitor and measure your progress and your success? This is recently being adapted into new financial products like sustainability-linked loans that are being pushed out by banks like BNP Paribas and ING. And last but not least, know your carbon footprint, right? It is no longer responsible to not know what your link is as a business or even as an investor to greenhouse gas emissions. Not just direct, not just what is in the building, but what is the indirect? What is the impact of your supply chain? What is the impact of your portfolio? There are ways, there are methods that are being tested to help you monitor and measure your impact. So these are some kind of concrete ideas and thoughts that I hope contribute to the discussion in the next few minutes. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christy. You've heard about the data and the smart technologies. You've heard about the gaps in the supply chain, the financing side, $400 million that we do not have, but Christy can help us get it. So get her to come here every month and drop by KL. But is that all? It's just also about human being. It's about our hearts and our mind. And what's the whole context of development? What are we developing for? How do we balance the spiritual and the physical and everything else? I don't know all this. I went to the non-Islamic Science University. So for you to know that, please welcome Professor Tan Sri Dr. Zul to tell you more about moving forward.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Greeting of peace and very good morning, Saudara Kamarul, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here. My other half is from Sabah, so I understand what Sabah is all about. And being here again is a nice place to be when you talk about sustainable development. I'm going to take a little different stance from my two panelists, in the sense that we need to go and revisit what sustainable development is all about. It has been 30 years now since the Brunson report of 1987, and I think the meaning of sustainable somehow or other has changed as we go along. Is green sustainable? Is smart sustainable? Is technology sustainable? These are the questions that I think we need to ask initially before you jump into the bandwagon called sustainable development. If you don't understand this right, then your sustainable development may be hijacked by some other people. They call it green industry, but is green industry sustainable? So we want to get rid of the labels, and you have to understand this properly. I want to start off from what the MC said when one of your write-ups, when you say, we are now, after 30 years, living on 1.7 planets to be sustainable, right? In other words, the progression for the last 30 years has not been that good. We should have been shrinking into one planet because we've got only one planet. Now we need to find another 0.7 planet. Where are we going to find these 0.7 planets? And I don't think it's possible in the shortest period of time, right? But this, again, this data is very deceiving. If you unpack this data, then this is what you see. United States is living on the resources of 5 planets. Generally, Europe is living on the resources of 3 planets. So when you talk about 1.7, it is not just 1.7. Somebody else is taking much more than the share that we should be having together. Yeah? India, with a population of 1.3 billion, has less than 1 planet to live on. How can this be possible? I think that's the first thing that we want to know. And we can bring this down to Kota Kinabalu compared to Kota Belud. I'm sure Kota Kinabalu takes a lot more than what Kota Belud has got. Kota Belud, I work in a place called Suang Pungur in Kota Belud. The last 2 years when I was there, Suang Pungur do not have water. For 45 years after Merdeka, Suang Pungur do not have water. So what are we talking about when we talk about sustainable development? On the very basics of this, for human survival, you can't even afford it, then let's not talk about sustainable development. If you're going to talk about sustainable development just about Kota Kinabalu or Washington or just New York or Tokyo or wherever, and not thinking about the people who are deprived of it, then I think it has no meaning in talking about sustainable development. So these are issues that we need to come to terms with in a place like this. You know, when we stay in an air-conditioned room with plastic bottles in front of us, sustainable development has very little meaning. You know, and sometimes we go into a kind of a point of hypocrisy. People like me fly from one place to another and talk about sustainable development in a room like this. It does not mean very much. I think we need to come back to the brass tack. What is sustainable development? It means a human-centric sort of idea of how people can live together on equitability, on justice, and all the rest of it. If this is not happening, then it's not sustainable, right? So what do we do with this? And I think countries who have got excess of this for a long time to come, they need to give it up, right? So in other words, we have to dismantle all these extra planets that you've been living on and give it back to people who due for this. If you take it from a country that you have colonized before, give it back to them. It's not yours. Yeah? You have taken it from a place that you exploited, give it back to them. It's not yours. In other words, the question of sustainability must be worked on ethics, morality, and trust. You don't have that, you have nothing. Yeah? A company can come and take something out of you and make money out of it. What have you got at the end of the day? I think this is a problem that Sabah is facing nowadays. People come and rob your wealth. Kuala Lumpur may be doing that, I'm not too sure. But Kuala Lumpur must be returning to you. I think it's time to talk about it. Right? So these are issues which is very basic before you want to talk about sustainable development in the depth of it. Otherwise, there's nothing that we can talk about. Yeah? So what do I mean by that? Then therefore, you need now to return those planets. Give it to India. Give it to Africa. Give it to Latin America. Give it to the rest of Asia, who is now in poverty. Then you can get your one planet back. And this is what the former United Nations Secretary General has been saying. There's only one planet. There's no plan B. We need to live on this one planet, and we cannot be living on one planet when people are hogging more than what they should have. This is what the world is facing now, this aggression, the violence, and all kind of thing. It's all because of this, if you come to the brass tack and understand what this is all about. Yeah? For people in Asia, understand this, because this is what Gandhi has been saying for a long time. There's enough for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed. And it's a very fundamental, very profound philosophy that if you want to live together, you must share. And you must share equitably. You must share in the spirit of justice. And this is what it is all about. Right? Only when you get that right, then you can talk about partnership. It must be equal partnership. It cannot be an unequal partnership, because you have got armies to back you up, then you can twist somebody else's arm and say, you do this and that's partner. That's not partnership. Again, partnership needs to be built on trust, ethics, and morality. You don't have that, you don't have partnership. You can write whatever you want to write on a piece of paper. It is not partnership in the essence of it. Yeah? So now when you talk about the future, we're just very timely. UNESCO has just launched a paper called The Futures of Education. And the futures of education now define what partnership is all about in the context of education. And I want to quote this. Yeah? I cannot read it, but you can read it. But it means that it must not come from any one focal point. People must begin to share. People must begin to contribute. People must begin to understand before we can create a real partnership in the real essence of it. And where does it come from? It comes from education. And this particular lady here is also the head of what we call the International Commission for the Futures of Education. This is going to be the new bearing of sustainable development moving on this education. Let me take just 2 minutes to finish this off. Before that, if you want to bring this whole idea of sustainability on a personal level, let me quote one very classical example. This comes from the World Bank resources. Yeah? An average African live on $2.30. I want to say two ringgit. $2.30. Yeah? But you look at a cattle in Europe draws an average subsidy of $2.20 a day. Can this be sustainable? Can cattle consume more than you, human beings? Because we think of sustainability in an economic sense, not a human-centric sense. Suddenly, when you look at this, you find there's something wrong with this whole idea of sustainable development. Okay? So let me just go quickly into what is the futures of education that was announced 24th of January recently by the Secretary General, by the Director General of UNESCO. And it talked about the learning to become. Yeah? For those of you who are not in education, we have got these 4 pillars of education. For the 21st century, learning to know, learning to do. This is what we do in the classroom all the time. Okay? But that's not enough. It has to be learning to be and learning to live together. What is learning to be? Learning to be is to know who you are as a human person, so that you can contribute and understand what humanity is all about. So can you live in this fairness that I talked to you earlier. Yeah? That people must have equitable resources to live with dignity. And then because of that, then you can live together. We don't have that in our education system. We don't have that in the world education system. And that's why we tend to live quite separately on our own planet, so to speak, not associating and not connecting to other people, and thinking we are the right one because we have got the better education than other people have. All right? So what they talk about, learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to live together, is about the social cohesion, as it were. Not on a communal level, but on a global level. How can you live equitably in that particular sense, all right? To respect diversity and to learn what culture is all about. No one culture is superior over the other. because culturally we are all the same in that particular context when you go back to ethics, morality, and also integrity in this particular. Yeah? So all this now needs to be derived from that. All these 4 pillars need to be converted to the pillars of learning to become what? Learning to become sustainable. Do you know how to live sustainably? If you still drive your big cars around, all right, at the expense of the environment, then you are not living sustainably. Yeah? So I think these are the issues that we need to tell our youngsters of how to live sustainably. And we need to go back to the indigenous knowledge, and this is the classical part of sustainable development. Sustainable development is now defined as living in the present without compromising the future. They have the present, we have the future. What about the past? We keep asking, what about the past? Is the past unsustainable? But the research that we do, we look at Bali, for example. We look at Bhutan, for example. We look at Thailand. Their past has been sustainable for a long time. The Subak system in Bali that guarantees the rice field been growing for the last 900 years. And they have been sustainable. The Bhutan gross national happiness that was conceptualized in 1926, I think. Yeah? And now it becomes their own idea of what sustainable development. The only country that is carbon negative. But look at Bhutan. It's a different country from the so-called modern developed country. They are not developed in their definition, but spiritually, ethically, and morally, they are more developed than many of us. You go to Bhutan, half a kilometer away from the airport, you have got this big billboard that says, no hurry, no worry. You know, I wish we have got that billboard around. In our place, hurry, 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 worry, 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 and commit suicide at the end of the day. You know? And this whole idea of rapid growth, I don't understand what is so rapid about this growth. Why can't we slow it down? Not everything can grow in a rapid way and then sustain it. Anything that goes up must come down. The only things that grow and grow and grow is the cancer cells. Let's look at what the cancer cell does. It kills you, it kills the whole, it kills everybody else. This whole idea of growth and in a rapid way is not human. It's coronavirus. Now, see, we can't even entertain coronavirus. So these are concepts that I think we need to revisit before we understand what sustainable development, give it to the education, tell our children what sustainable development is about. We have messed up the world, tell them, sorry, let's make the world again. And I think that's where education comes in. At the right time when UNESCO is revising the whole idea of what education and what development is all about. Until we do that, we're just talking hot air. I think we will not be arriving at anything. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Prof. Now you know why I went to USM and not UMS. You see the kind of professors they have. Too bad IIU stole him away, but never mind. We export our excellence, right? Sharing is caring. But wow, you guys clapped so hard when Weather Putrajaya stole something from you, huh? Lucky I'm from Perlis. The North-South Highway was supposed to end in Padang Besar. Everyone in Malaysia knows dari Perlis sampailah ke Sabah, but the highway suddenly went to Kedah. The airport was supposed to be the northernmost. Suddenly it's near Alustar. You think you're the only one who got things wrong, Ayyo. But never mind. Because in his points also, meaning no issue lah, all royalty, right? Because oil and gas is carbon. So why you want something that is polluting the environment? So thank you so much. You want to take from Prof. Zul, you take everything, don't just take that part only. So thank you so much. We'll revisit that later. But we have to hear from the United Nations. Any initiative under the United Nations will be holistic, at least on paper and in trying to implement it. The first time I got into the United Nations building, I just spent 15 minutes standing at the entrance of the cafeteria. Because the whole diversity of the skin color, the colors of the wardrobe and uniforms, the languages that you were hearing, that to me is exactly Borneo, why diversity is business as usual, and development must be respecting that, not the other way around. So for that, please, the Executive Director of a very important initiative and institution of the United Nations, Mr. Farouz, over to you.
Thank you, Kamarul. Assalamualaikum. Tough act to follow, Tan Sri, but I'll do my best. So I'm Farouz. I'm the ED for Global Compact Network Malaysia. We are the official local network of the United Nations Global Compact. We work primarily, exclusively with private sector, and we hope to make them agents of change for creating a sustainable world. So I'm going to share more lens towards the private sector's role in developing a future we want. And I hope to stick to the 3 B's of speaking. I'll be brief, I'll be good, and then I'll be gone, yeah? Let me go slide. The world is becoming more volatile, uncertain, challenging, ambiguous, VUCA. There's also evolving business risk. To put into context, 19 of the hottest years on record has been the past 20 years. And this kind of dovetails, if you look at the most recent WIEF report, risk report, is for the first time ever, environmental and social risk is highlighted as the most probable and the most impactful towards private sector. So green has become the new red in terms of risk. And taking this into account, our global office in New York at WIEF this year launched something called the SD Ambition, in which we are calling the private sector to set more ambitious targets to becoming more sustainable. I mean, it's great talking about single-use plastic, but we need to talk about how is private sector impacting the climate change agenda. How are we going to ensure that the world doesn't tip over the 1.5 degrees that we have set as our threshold in ensuring that everybody can live comfortably without a burning sun, right? So private sector needs to be much more ambitious towards becoming more sustainable. Now, this is not only just a moral issue, it's also because now if you see, there is a dynamic shift in how the capital markets are engaging the private sector. There is a huge rise of ESG investment. I think Christy has brought up the point that ESG has become an important factor of decision makings of how investors and banks are starting to give out financing. If you look at the statistics, the ESG funds has grown about 10 times to about $300 billion over the past couple of years because investors are starting to ask, how are companies behaving beyond just making a profit? How are they behaving in terms of the environmental footprint? How are they looking at their social prosperity factors? And in a recent survey on 41 institutional investors with a combined assets of $26 trillion globally, 100% of respondents said that they are taking ESG factors into consideration in their decision making. So this is here to stay. Now, this is here to stay even despite the plunging prices of petroleum and things like that. As Tan Sri said, because we only have one world and we're only living 1.7 times of the world. So the financial market will shift. And to add into Christy's point of not only the global banks are giving sustainability-linked loans now, even CIMB and HSBC Amanah has started this. And you will see many Malaysian banks moving into these things. So ESG will remain, and for private sector, being sustainable is now the key for you to unlock the new financing frontier, which is sustainable finance. So how can private sector be more sustainable? So allow me to offer an equation. Now, this is my own equation. It's not scientifically proven, so don't quote me on this. In my experience being a sustainability practitioner, I believe a sustainable business is a business that is profitable. Because profit gives some form of power for influence for the private sector to make. I think, but what is most important is how is this profit and power is being divided or bounded by the corporate values of the organization. As Tan Sri said, how are we humanizing this? We are where we are today is because we are chasing endless growth, endless profit, without understanding how is this impacting us at a human level. So private sector needs to start thinking, I make so much money, but is this helping me survive the next 10 years? There's no point we make record profits if 10 years down the road, all our assets is going to be underwater because of rising sea cliffs. So we've got to take into the value propositions of becoming good business. And this also means that private sector are sovereign decision makers, doesn't have to depend on national jurisdiction to say that you have to be sustainable. We can make independent decisions to be sustainable. And Again, echoing Christy's thought that we need to also understand that private sector has both direct and indirect impact. So it's not just good enough for your company to be sustainable. You need to understand how is your supply chain behaving, because depending on your industry, your supply chain actually contributes a lot towards your ESG scoring as well. So how is fair trade coming across your supply chain? So as producing companies, this is very important, because the buyers will demand this. So it's either you are sustainable or you will be given a standard that you'll be forced to follow. And a lot of people are complaining with that initiative. So at the end of it, decision makers needs to be in the business of making sustainability-linked decisions. So we've got to stop asking, is this only profitable? We've also got to ask, is this also sustainable? And in this context, there are 4 key focus areas for private sectors to look at in terms of starting their sustainability journey. One is private sector needs to decarbonize their production processes, because this is direct correlation of how private sector will contribute towards the climate change agenda. Second is we need to ensure decent work for all. We have to ensure that no one is left behind, and this is where the indirect impact comes into play. A lot of time the issues happens at the supply chain issue, perspective, and smallholders are usually left out. If you look at the numbers, for every thousands or millions of dollars a private sector makes in profit, a small handful is given to the farmers or shareholders who actually do the bulk of the work. So how do we ensure this that doesn't happen in supply chains for ensuring decent work for all? Third is we must promote gender equality. This cannot be overstressed. I think it's a positive thing. There's more women than men. I think it's moving to that direction. And there's also research that shows that women make better bosses. So gender equality is important, and if we unlock this, there's already so much growth to the GDP, if this is, research has backed this. And finally, a sustainable business is built on good governance and ethics. We cannot run away from this. But more importantly, we need to treat being sustainable as a professional approach. It must go beyond just being CSR. We must be driven by data, because we must measure the good that we do. And this will result in how a private sector is contributing towards becoming a positive contributor to the Sustainable Development Goals, and also to your business excellence. I don't like to use the word profit, because profit kind of detones monetary only, but business excellence moves beyond how happy your people are, and also talks about how are you ensuring the thrivability and environment and the footprint that you operate in. So I would like to offer, four steps that private sector can begin their sustainability journey. It's important for us to understand that a private sector needs to drive their sustainable development goals performance. We want to achieve performance in being sustainable, and this can only be unlocked by being innovative. So the more innovative you are, the more aspirational you can be. So we start at the lower base first. So first is channel your CSR monies to close the funding gap. I think we talk about funding gap. Private sector has a lot of CSR money sloshing around. Channel it to closing this gap. Be more strategic in your CSR. Second is you need to transition your business purpose towards becoming more sustainable. So you got to ask, beyond just making money, why are we here? And you see a lot of ONG companies are re-looking at this approach, because they understand that hydropower, petrol is not the way to go. So they're investing into renewables. So what is your business purpose for being sustainable? Third is you need to ensure your entire your supply chain is sustainable. Like as I mentioned, it's easy to say, your direct footprint is sustainable, but what about your supplier and your supplier's suppliers? In our term, it's your scope 2 and scope 3. We must look at scope 3 approach. And finally, this could be the most difficult of all. How do we break the competitive mindset? Competition work together, so that together we can reduce the resources required, yet drive the opportunities across the board. So working together with your competitors will be key in achieving the SDGs for private sector. But I want to end just to say that, sustainability for private sector can be complex. There are many layers. It can be daunting. But at the end of the day, it is actually a mental shift. It's actually a moral decision, because we know some of the things that we need to do. The question is, how do we do it for the long term, because it impacts our bottom line. So we must treat this as an investment. And I want to end my presentation with one of my favorite quotes, which I think encapsulates the thinking about private sector and being sustainable and the courage that is required. And the poem goes like this: there is a freedom waiting for you on the breezes of the sky, and you ask, what if you fall? But oh my darling, what if you fly? Thank you.
Thank you, Farouz. Starting with millions and infrastructure and financing and ending with mental. This country has a mental health issue, and he ended with mental. So, you know, Awani is not at Bukit Jalil and Astro HQ, is at right smack in the center of KL. There's a reason for that. Because if you want to be naughty, you do not stay near the principal's office. But suddenly, the principal and the deputy principal has entered the hall. So I'm going to be a bit quiet now. No, I'm just joking with my Yang Amat Berhormats. So I'm just going to sum up for our VVIP's understanding. So 4 panelists of mine today, great ones, have presented that we have great challenges to ensure sustainability in the future of development, especially in an ecosystem like Sabah, because there's a big gap that we have to look at, like funding and infrastructure for the future. And, you know, Frost and Sullivan, always a great data company, shared how if you go smart, it doesn't have to be expensive, but you got to develop smartly. Why go on cars that you use only 70% of the time, but might be your second biggest cost to pay every month, the installment, for example. Christy said that this is her first time, and she talks about 400 million US dollar and stuff like that. But have you ever networked with what she does? And for your information, she is chief of party, but it's not political parties. Huh? Over the last few weeks, I don't blame you. If I say party, you mean politics. But she is looking at how do we look at green investment and all this stuff. Not maybe country by country. For example, Borneo only have one natural ecosystem. So how do you look at, you know, that kind of perspective, which is hundreds of millions of US dollars in respect? Prof. Tan Sri Zul, as usual, the disruptor in the room, she came in and said, yeah, good and fine, but how come a cow in Europe gets more subsidy per day than somebody in Africa or in Asia who might be living on $1 for example? I just Googled, and you know, while Sabah has done great in reducing hardcore poverty from double figure percentage to single figure, around maybe just below 3%, but you look at the daily income of these people and the lack of maybe certain basic services, and then you begin to wonder the point that Prof. Tan Sri Zul is being made. And then Farouz, my good friend here, put up the point, and he put up that 4 key things at the end. So I'm going to go into the Q&A now. Feel free to just queue at the mic right now, but I'm going to start the privilege of the moderator. I had a different question, but because the Chief Minister is here, I'm going to switch. No, because at the end of the day, in this country, you know, let's tackle the elephant in the room. It's about political will. For 60 over years since independence, the country was heavily led from the top down by the people in power. And that's the way to go, right? Because we just came out of colonialism. My grandfather didn't go to school because there's no school within walking distance in the paddy fields of Perlis. Sounds familiar in Borneo, right? So I have always identified with Sabahan and Sarawakian. At the age of 13, because there's not much good school in Perlis, I was sent to a boarding school. Thank God for government scholarship. Left to my bed is a Yayasan Sarawak student. Right to my bed is a Yayasan Sabah student. So I've never looked at a different thing other than Malaysian. But as I grow older and move towards the Klang Valley, diversity seems to be a problem because it's more of a gap rather than an enabler. So I'm going to ask this to my panelists. With the heightened state of politicking, not only in KL, but also in Sabah, you know, because you go to social media, who watches Awani lah? People go on WhatsApp, you know, that's the bare facts. How do we talk about sustainability? I'm saying that because there are principals in the room. Maybe they will, you know, take heed. So I'm going to put pressure on all my 4 key panelists. What about political will to drive the fact that for the future to matters, it starts now and it starts at the very top because the top control education. Prof. Zul talked about the new 4 pillars of education, dare to be. But if the new Minister of Higher Education has a different idea, has a short-term KPI where in 3 years they need to achieve certain things because that's the political cycle, then what are we talking about? Because this doesn't respect the 5-year political cycle. The environment doesn't wait for us to get our act in order. Prof. Zul, I'm going to start with you because in January in Davos, I paid a lot of money just to be there with the thought leaders in Davos, and a 16-year-old girl with 2 ponytails just blasted everyone and said, you guys are not doing anything because you're not respecting the 1.5 degrees limit that we all agreed to. So can you touch a bit about political will? Because Christy might be afraid that she won't get visa to get into Malaysia or get into Sabah. Political will, our current state of politics in Sabah and nationally, and how do we put to them the points we're making here?
Thank you very much. It's a difficult question, but I think it's already staring at us. If you go back to Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, which was introduced in 1988. And sustainable development, the idea was introduced in 1988 also, in 1987, about the same time, 30 years ago. Yeah? And there's a word in the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan. How many of you knows about the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan anyway? Yeah? You don't know the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, so how do you run an education system? Yeah? That's the basic question. There's a word called kesejahteraan diri. And that word, it says, if you have kesejahteraan diri, then you can contribute to yourself, your family, your community, your nation. Now, let me ask you, what is the word sejahtera means to you? We've been talking about this, yeah? Pada podium tadi, salam sejahtera, salam sejahtera. What is sejahtera? Sejahtera is sustainable. The word that we use when I talk about the past, we have been using this word for a long time before Brunton report came in, 1987. We've been using it. That's why we go back to the indigenous community. You find the indigenous community, by and large, are more sustainable than the people who live in high-rise in Kuala Lumpur.
Prof. Zul, but it's all due respect. The indigenous community doesn't have the parameters of how we measure development. GDPs, for example, purchasing power parity. These are all the KPIs that the voters want to know from Yang Amat Berhormat Chief Minister and Yang Amat Berhormat Deputy Chief Minister. So how do we reconcile?
It's the same team. You have the figures. Now, you have been selling this just now. You have the figures, but you go down to the ground, the figures do not translate. Yeah? Nice, lofty figures, but you go to the ground, there are still people who are hungry. I was just, YB talking, we were working in Swampungur. Swampungur has no water for 42 years. So what does it mean, this two or three or whatever numbers you've got, when people on the ground are not getting the translation of these figures? So these figures, to me, sometimes is just a hoax. Good for politicians, but bad for the people on the ground. And education is being that now. Everybody now, we just had a ranking game being out today. Yeah? My university is one of the top 50 in one of the subjects. But let me tell you the secret. We didn't give a single data to these rankers. And yet we got a number. This is how statistics are being done. You know statistic, more statistic and damn lies. You're talking about big data, now bigger lies.
Prof, let me buffer that a bit to, there's SEDC here, they have to report to the CM. So they have to use all this data lah. So how do they interpret it with what you are saying? Are you saying that, okay, fine, look at the data that the economic planning unit have, but always balance it with the reading from the ground?
The ground.
Right?
Yeah.
Can we agree on that? Oh, very good lah, you all. I'm going to go to Christy now. I mean, you've looked at Cambodia, Laos, the Mekong region. The Mekong region cannot just work with national interests. Because if they do, if one country built a dam on the Mekong, the other country will want to attack that country. Because there's only one river that is the lifeblood of living from Vietnam, actually from China, right down to Thailand. So how do you move and partner, like what you said, but with thinking about the bigger picture? Because it's easy for Sabah just to concentrate on Sabah. But to have a sustainable ecosystem, Sabah might really have to work with Kalimantan, Sarawak, and Brunei, for example.
I asked you not to ask me hard questions.
Well, you're the only masalah in the room, so...
Well, just a little bit of question from me. I think it's important to realize that we talk about partnership, it's because there are multiple actors, right? I mean, there's government, but there's also private sector, there's financial actors, there's NGOs, there's students, right? Everybody has a role to play. Certainly there's a role for government and policy and coming together on forums where agreements can be made. But I just want to kind of maybe flip around a little bit to just private sector, because I think that was more of trying to think of, like, are the solutions that we face, are the challenges that we face around development, are those solutions solely the responsible of government? Are they capable of putting together the leadership required? Or in the absence of that, what can private sector do? And I think we saw a real transformation many years ago in Paris, where there was a shift in private sector, governments saying, we want to do this, and private sector coming together and say, yes, we want to do this too. We have a common objective here, which is around the sustainable future and economic growth, the health of our environment, the health of our people. And that over the years, and I think, over the years we've seen that the private sector has stepped up to say, what we are influenced by are things like markets, and that in order to ensure the security of our markets, we are putting into place things like metrics around sustainability, and we will track those whether or not the government enforces it or not, because we know that that is good for our business. And then investors are also shifting how they look at their responsibility, and they are also putting into place metrics and tools that reward good business behavior in line with those sustainability metrics. And that we also see the younger generations coming up using the social media tools to put pressure on private sector as well as their governments to say, we believe that this is an important issue for our generation. We will get behind it, we will organize, we will come to the UN in pigtails and tell you what we think.
Okay.
And people are responding to that.
I just want to bring the horizon up a bit. Many people look at forests and the island of Borneo, but there's also a sustainable development goal looking at the resources of the ocean below the waterline, right? And Sabah relies heavily on fisheries. And according to the reports that I read, 90% of the surveyed area, the fish stocks has really gone down. And this is not just a unique problem to Sabah. It's all over the world. So why can't the South China Sea have an initiative between the private sectors from as far away as Vietnam to Sabah, and if they put that across to you, would you be looking at the initiative?
I think, well, there are some initiatives in the region around oceans. I am not directly involved in those initiatives. However, there is clear recognition that something like an ocean or on land, a watershed, is a transboundary issue, and therefore requires multiple actors to engage and work on those issues.
Yeah. You can look at the CM and say, but never mind. Hazmi, smart cities is one of your key expertise. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Okay. How do you look at the role of smart cities in being sustainable? Because like it or not, the fact is, most of the development and wealth being created in Malaysia is created in the urban centers. So for Sabah, from the west coast, there is like KK, right to the east coast, like Sempurna and Sandakan and Lahad Datu. How do you look at the concept of smart city? Because from my poor understanding, if you build on the city you already have, it's going to cost you more in terms of resources. But like what Jakarta is doing, new Jakarta, part of it is because of that. So you can outlay. I give you a problem. Sometimes you always say, oh, Malaya, that side, they got everything, MRT, you don't have. But if I take MRT from Pusat Bandar Damansara, that's supposed to be a funky, elite place, okay, to go to my office, the train would be, like that. You know why? Because it's worse than the F1 corner. F1 corner is at least 40 degrees. This is like 90. Who built trains and it has to take a 90 degrees turn on top of a hill? When that happens, and then we complain, why Malaysians don't like to take public transport? Because if you're standing on a train and you're a lady, I imagine I'm a lady, okay? You have two bags. One is the laptop bag, the other is your handbag, one hand on the rail, and then you'll be like, then you don't like this guy beside you, right? Then you hit the other guy on your left. So I'm just saying, we talk so much about smart and technology and sustainability, but at the human level, it's like they're not even being considered. It's the multi-billion tender that decides everything, not the end user. Then what's the point of democracy? So please encapsulate all that in the lessons to learn from Sandakan and Sempurna right down to KK here.
Wow.
I remember the CM is in front of you. Okay, thank you.
I think two things. Firstly, if you look at building smart on top of an existing city, you look at Jakarta. Jakarta is one of the place where even countries like Singapore goes there to study how smart is implemented. So the smartest city in the world is going to Jakarta to learn from the Indonesians how they do smart. So can you imagine that? But if you ask a typical Jakartarian, he wouldn't know that there's a smart technology being in place. So I think smart is fairly ubiquitous at the back. You don't really feel it. But if you look at one of the best things that Jakarta did was that they've actually used the simplest technology, which is a smart card, to give to the civil servants in Jakarta, living in the middle of Jakarta, because most of their officers are there, having to live in a very expensive location,
yes,
with civil servant salary. So they've given this card where civil servants are able to buy certain commodity at a discount, right? So they are using the simplest technology where wherever there's a transaction, it's keyed back to the command center, and they are able to manage and control inflation or deflation, yes, because of the subsidy.
Can I interject there?
Okay.
We look a lot at the private sector, but cities are controlled, ruled, and governed by governments. So are you saying that the government must be looking at all this first, then the private sector can come in, or?
Yeah, I think it's very much driven in the beginning by the government, followed by the.
So should we have a new Kota Kinabalu? No.
What do you mean new?
Yeah, like New Jakarta, you know? Because the old cities are built from the first, second, and third industrial revolution, not the fourth.
But you look at Kota Kinabalu, they are following the trend of all the new development, which is transit-oriented development.
Okay.
So what's transit-oriented development means that you work, you live, you play, all within a certain area.
So you're saying they're on the right track?
I think so, yes.
Oh, CM come, you say like that. Okay, never mind. Prof. Tan Sri Zul.
I just want to interject. I think if you talk about sustainable development, where you want to lift people who have been left behind, then I think we should be talking about smart villages, smart kampung. You know, because these are the ones that you want to lift up, rather than talking about smart cities. And the Japanese are doing just this. The Japanese has gone through all these big metropolis, and they think that is not going to be sustainable anymore. They've got a policy called Satoyama policy now, which says that every people will go back to their villages and build that into a smart village, a smart kampung. And then you begin to see the equitability between what village and cities and cities all about. If you keep on talking about smart cities and the villages are still left on their own, then you're going to create more disparities, and you are not so smart after all.
So,
you know?
See, if you want to be a moderator, you have to set it like that. You lambong, then you know got somebody like to smash like Dato' Lee Chong Wei, then you let him smash lah. Why is this all so silent? Grassroots is the most important route ever. I told you already you could stand at the mic, especially that you have your Yang Amat Berhormats here, right? You want them to hear the pain of the grassroots, right? Anybody from Kudat here? Sempurna? I don't, depan I tahu dah, belakang. Oh, you all are so shy now. I promise you, if you do not stand at the mic, I am going to go to you with this mic, that's why it's called cordless mic, and sit beside you and get you and your opinion. While waiting, Farouz. I mean, come on. At the end of the day, you need resources. And you talk about capital from the private sector. But the government still have to manage this. So if we scope it down to, let's pretend that we're working in the Chief Minister's office. Okay?
Excuse me.
Yeah, you there? Where are you?
Over here.
Okay, wait. Let me finish this point. Kesian lah, awak ni tak sempat habis cakap. Come on. Imagine we are in the CM office. Everyone else is saying, you must give this peruntukan there lah, must build there. Suddenly we remember what Prof. Tan Sri Zul said. Yeah, but why are you concentrating on the urban? Concentrate on rural smart lah. Then how are you going to go against the tide? Because investors always look for returns. If you suddenly say, no, don't do smart cities, do smart villages, and they'll be looking at you like, so what's the benchmark? What's the rate of investment return? How is the Chief Minister Office advisor going to advise the Chief Minister on this?
I'm going to answer this from my understanding of
look
SD
down,
perspective.
it's okay. I'm not handsome.
Caveat first. No, I think, in my opinion, first we need to qualify what is sustainable development, as Tan Sri said. We need to drill down the very basics of understanding this. So take, for example, if you take at the numbers of the biggest emitters, carbon emitters in the world, they list down China and India as the biggest emitters.
Okay.
Now, this is because it's based on a production model.
Okay.
So, but majority of their products are being consumed in the developed world. There's a third methodology of calculating which actually looks at what a consumption model. And if that methodology is used, the biggest emitters are no more India and China. It's actually US and Europe. So is that the way? What kind of methodology do you want to use? And the second thing about the 16-year-old.
Okay.
I mean, she's great.
Okay.
She's a beacon of change. We also need to balance the Western ideals with Asian realities. I think we need to ground that. There are many things that a developing country needs that developed countries have already leapfrog. So we need to understand in that context.
Okay.
So we need to see what is important from that. And from an investor perspective, I think we need to be also now brave enough to say, look, the reason why we are in a mess today is because we are doing it as business as usual. Because we are profit-driven only, right? We have to go beyond that. That narrative and conversation needs to be seeded and started somewhere, and it has to be started from the top.
So put like a rule. Any investment in Sabah must answer the sustainability rule.
Well, a rule is great, right? But the most important is what kind of rule you want to implement. Because sometimes
sustainability lah.
Correct, but it's very broad. You have to pick the
go
right.
finer.
We have to go. We have to write what is sustainability for Sabah. I think that's the important rule that you want to put.
But Sabah said by 2035 I want to be the manufacturing hub. Let me get the phrase. Resource-based manufacturing, location of choice. Isn't manufacturing for production?
True, but again, you see, this is where you look at the externalities, right?
Yeah.
So if you take, for example, the externalities of electric vehicles, right? The vehicle is great, but the electricity is still powered by coal, which is still damaging, unsustainable. The Sabah has direct access to Sarawak, which is, in my opinion, quite sustainably powered by big hydro. I mean, again, that's a different discussion, but I believe big hydro is a sustainable power source.
Okay.
So this kind of connection can be made, and the externalities is actually much lower for this kind of footprint. So you can have responsible manufacturing if you plug this kind of externalities.
But what's the point of manufacturing using green energy but producing combustion engine vehicles? Right? That's the point that you were making, right, Prof? Yes. Where's my friend just now? Ran away already. Allah, merajuk. Correct. Just stand, I will come to you. Yeah.
Bukan merajuk bah bro, tunggu bah.
Okay. Please introduce yourself and where you're from. So that the special branch can really take you if you say something wrong. Okay, never mind, go ahead.
I think I better sit down. Okay, my name is Aldi. Okay, I'm not actually used
Jamri
to...
from where?
I'm from Uina Sundram Berhad.
Okay.
We are craft beverage manufacturers.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm not used to talking in public, so my voice is a bit
I'm very
shaky.
friendly, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is going back to Tan Sri. he was talking about smart villages.
Okay.
Then after that, there is a movement of people going back to villages to do farming, because you're saying that by 2030 we need to increase our food production capacity,
Yes.
right? But over here in Sabah, the question is, farmers, when they produce the agriculture product, the chicken, whatever, the vegetables, whatever, they are not getting paid as much as the middle person.
Okay.
The retailers, the distributors,
Understood.
the property owners are
Yes.
making more than them.
Okay.
What can the government do to ensure
Okay.
that policies are in place to
Fine.
ensure that the farmers get their fair share of the trade?
That's it?
Yeah.
Where are you from?
Tuaran.
Where are you born?
Tuaran.
Tuaran. The MP is going to get the... Okay, never mind. Second question? Yes.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Rizal. I'm an architect, chairman of Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia Sabah chapter.
Okay.
So it seems that all the panelists are referring to sustainability.
Yes.
So from what I've heard, most of the terms of sustainability are referred to the Western idealism, Asian
Okay.
idealism.
Okay.
So this forum supposed to be using the heading of Islamic. So referring to the revisiting
Okay.
the definition of sustainability,
Yes.
we have Muslim and non-Muslim panelists on stage.
Okay.
How do you define sustainability in terms of Islamic perspective?
Okay.
Thank you.
Fine, I'll take these two first. Prof, you want to start with the second question first because you started with sejahtera just now. And sejahtera is in the Quran and in the Hadith.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the concept of sustainability in Islam is there way back during the time of the Prophet. Simple examples. Prophet, when the shoe is spoiled, he mend it. He doesn't buy a new one. Yeah? If his clothes is torn, he will mend it. He doesn't go and get a new one. I mean, that is sustainable in its essence. You will conserve, you preserve what you have until you cannot use it, then you get a new one. But not in the modern days. You want to have 241 handbags, whatever for. When the first one you're not even being used. And these are issues that are now plaguing us. The younger generations are living on this lifestyle.
Okay.
With all these medias and been pushing things to them, and they will buy it because they want to buy it. The word sustainable does not appear in them.
Yeah.
Now, what do we do in IUM?
Yes.
We have now redefined sustainability from the Islamic ideals.
Okay.
We use the Maqasid al-Sharia as the 4 pillars or the 5 pillars of the basic human existence, of protecting life, intellectual, property, progeny, and belief.
Okay.
Now, all your 17 goals can be put into these boxes of 5. You don't have to remember 17.
So
if it
short
protects
answer,
life, then sustainable.
So short answer, go and take courses in IIU, right?
Yeah.
To get more?
Can I just say one more?
Go
We
ahead.
are even inventing another one, Sustainable Development Goal 18, which is about spirituality and spiritual knowledge.
Okay.
So that's our contribution,
Okay.
inshallah.
Round table, next one. SDG 18. Christy, can I get you quick one on that?
Just a quick one. The last question, they're both questions, but certainly the last question around sustainability in terms of Islam and the fact that I agree. I think a lot of sustainability conversation has been very much driven by Western nations. And in fact, part of the reason why I really wanted to come today was to get a better sense of, what does sustainability mean for businesses that kind of adhere to non-Western ideas, laws, culture, traditions, and how do these two things merge? Because regardless of your religious beliefs, we are on one planet, and it's been very clear that this one planet is so interrelated. So I'm curious, especially in relation to Islamic finance and tapping into that in order to get the investment that's needed into sustainable business practices.
Does that apply to President Trump's White House? Never mind, don't answer that. Feroz, you take the first question, please. Government intervention into free, liberal, open trading market system.
I think that question was along fair trade and how we can ensure that the farmers are properly compensated.
Yes.
Right. I think we can be innovative in this sense, leveraging technology. So now, imagine if you are able to tell the consumers that this product is produced by X farmers, right? And as a consumer, you say, hey, if I'm paying 10 ringgit for this, how much is this going to go back to the farmer? Is 9 ringgit being used by the company? Only 1 ringgit? I think we need to introduce traceability and transparency back into supply chains.
Okay.
And consumers need to drive this pressure.
Okay.
But can I also just go for the
Go
Islamic
ahead,
one?
go ahead.
I think from an Islamic perspective, the Islamic finance are great instruments for these SDGs. If you take zakat, zakat is one of financial instrument that does not look for return on investment.
Yes.
That can be actually put into closing the sustainable development gaps. So if we can pivot all our zakat towards closing the gaps, I think that can be very faithful. Simply because they will not ask, where is my money back for that?
Okay. I'm just going to get the lady that is already standing. Over to you. Any question? No? Okay, go ahead.
Can I answer the first question? Because I'm part of the team that's doing smart farming at the government level, not in Malaysia. I think what's happening is that governments across many countries are looking at clustering through digital platform. What do you mean by clustering? If you're a single farmer and you have 50 chickens, your leverage with the middleman is, right? Imagine you cluster yourself with 500 other people, may not be your neighbor, maybe in another village, but you cluster it through a digital platform. You're able to, even sell direct to maybe supermarkets and end users. So I think that's one of the areas that we are looking at, using digital to kind of shorten the value chain.
Anyone else before I close the Q&A? Ahmad Muhammad, I can go to you. I'll answer you. LPP Kuala Langat. Go to asrawani.com. I've done 3 stories myself on it. They were doing chili. Their cost is 5 ringgit per kilo. The middleman will take it at 4. If their cost goes up to 7, the middleman at most will take it at 6, always in the negative. So they sit behind a tree, get together, and finally decide to take power into their own hands. Now, they're the first group of farmers without cash transaction. They have an app where they supply direct to hypermarkets, for example, and their concept is very simple. You put the chili in your pocket. Kalau dia besar, panjang dan terjojol, I'm so sorry Yang Muhammad, but this is a fact. Terjojol, maka itu adalah grade A, and grade A goes to the hypermarket. Look that up. That's a point to answer. I have to close this because of time. I'm going to ask for only one key point from each of my panelists. If they don't take anything else from this discussion, what will it be?
Can you start that way?
No. You start this and you start the end.
I think 2 key points in terms of
I
driving.
asked for one and you give 2. Oh my God.
Digital and data. So, that's
okay lah, fine. Digital and data, what do they do? Focus on that first.
Okay. Digital and data to make the right decision, to maximize capacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Christy?
I think it's around leadership, and that at this point in time, in relation to forging a sustainable future, many actors have the potential to really take a leadership position to demonstrate what can be done in concrete ways to realize longer-term sustainability visions and goals.
Tan Sri?
I think it's education. When the Earth Summit took place in 1992, for 10 years until 2002, nothing happened. In 2002, when they add in education for sustainable development, then things open up. So I think education is the route. We are not doing education for sustainable development now.
Faris?
The climate crisis is now actually our generational crisis. It's no more the future thing. So sustainability must be by design, not by chance.
Thank you so much. Can I get a big round of applause? Awani is the only Malaysian media accredited at the World Economic Forum in Davos. We've been going there for 5 years. It took me 7 years to get Awani that accreditation. I'm now the media leader. I'm not saying this belagak. I'm saying this to qualify that that's one of the biggest, highest platform in the world discussing issues like this. I'm so proud to be here today because today Sabah proved that it also want to have an in at that table where we do care about the future and we do want to solve the problem of now. I would like to thank WIEF. I would like to thank the state government. This is my first official event after Malaysia Baru with Yang Amat Berhormat Ketua Menteri. I'm so touched. Hopefully he'll give me an interview after this. I've been waiting so long, but never mind. My point is this: diversity. You have it already. How I wish sometime that I was born in Borneo. My mother always complained that I didn't come back often enough to see her. I said, Mom, that's your fault. If you had given birth to me in Borneo, I might be more earthly and, you know. Yes. So, saya mencari ilmu di merata-rata tempat di dunia. Sampailah di Davos, Switzerland, di puncak Alp yang begitu tinggi dan mahal sekali. Tapi saya pulang ke Malaysia. Saya datang ke sini dan di negeri di bawah bayu saya mendapat inspirasi baru. Jadi terima kasih banyak kepada rakyat dan kerajaan negeri Sabah. Thank you so much. Over back to Ben, your moderator.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much, Mr. Kamarul and speakers, for such an insightful sharing. May I invite our role players to the front center of the stage for a group photograph, please. A very insightful first session, I must say. For more of Kamarul's intellect and wit, please tune into Astro Awani Channel 501. Like the jeans. Terima kasih. Thank you, role players. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're posting photos or videos on Facebook and Instagram, or if you are tweeting about today's event, please do not forget to put on hashtag WIEF RTKK 2020.